Welcome, ACSA family and friends, to Common Purpose, Uncommon Times. I am Wes Smith, and as always, honored to serve as the Executive Director of ACSA, and happy to be back with you. It's been a couple of weeks. We had some things going on recently you may have heard about, so we wanted to let you focus on those things. We'll talk about some of that tonight, post-election realities in California and the impact on public education. Got a great guest with us this evening who is an absolute expert, going to blow you away with what he knows about politics and policy, not only in California, but the federal level as well. But before we get into that, let me just thank um, our AXA team, the staff and membership, all of you who participated in the Leadership Summit. Uh, I think we would have all laughed 7 years ago if we said, can you imagine? Just imagine this. We're going to do Leadership Summit. We're going to do everything. Get togethers, every student succeeding, administrator of the year, but we're going to do it online only. We would have laughed for hours. Yeah, sure. And guess what, folks? You pulled it off last week. Almost 650 folks showed up for 50 pre-recorded sessions, 20 hours of live inspirational content. We celebrated our amazing students in the Every Student Succeeding program, and we honored you, our Administrators of the Year, Friday night. We did all the things we set out to do, and wasn't perfect. Things never are. But I think it was absolutely inspiring. I think there was content that's going to help all of us do our jobs better as we work to meet the needs of California's 6.3 million students. And boy, do they have some great needs right now. And so I want to thank all of you who showed up and attended. I also want to thank our amazing staff. Uh, Many of you never get to see Danelle, but she and the Ed Services team just do so much work behind the scenes. And speaking of behind the scenes, our communications team were there trying to make sense of everything going on behind the curtain. Some of our folks even stepped out in front of the curtain. Naj and Michael are getting calls from all over the state that they should be in front of the camera more often. I told them I'll step aside Monday nights and the two of them can co-host Common Purpose. They truly are experts and they did a great job. But again, to all of you, thank you for being there. To my amazing team, thank you for representing our membership with the professionalism um, and high quality that you did last week. It was awesome to be a part of this team. Hey, let's make you aware of some of the things that are coming up this week. We have a great AXA campus tour beginning at 10 on Facebook and YouTube. Um, this week on the campus tour, and that's Tuesday for those of you who haven't tuned in before, we've got the Nevada City School District Superintendent, Monica Doherty. She opened her schools in a hybrid, and then the second day of school, they had to be evacuated because of the Jones fire. And so she's going to talk about pivoting and what they went through, and how she's really, really focusing on supporting the social and emotional needs, not just her students, not just her staff, but her entire community. So tune into that. That's going to be inspiring. We've also got on Wednesday our legislative lunch break beginning at 1 o'clock. That's also on Facebook and YouTube. Naj and Edgar are going to talk about a number of things, including what we may learn about sports in high schools in California this year. So for those of you who are interested in that, for no other reason than, besides the fact that Edgar and Naj are amazing, right? And what else are you going to do at 1 o'clock? Um, you're going to hear some news, hopefully, that'll help you plan for the rest of the year. And we know the importance of co and extracurricular activities for engaging students and oftentimes some of our neediest students. So it's important information, all kidding aside. But let's welcome our guest tonight. I brag all the time that we have the best GR team in the state. I'm biased, and that's fine. But I'll arm wrestle any other association for that distinction. Our folks they're brilliant. They are hardworking. They are people of great principle But more than anything else, their number one goal is to support the rights and needs of our students, and that's why they came to work here. And that's why they do the work with the vigor that they bring to every task for those students. And that's why I'm honored to work with them. And we've got with us tonight the head of our GR team, Dr. Edgar Zazueta. We are not going to criticize him for getting his doctorate at a university whose football team is the worst 2-0 team in college football right now. I know that I have lamented it 8 hours over the last 2 weekends. But Edgar, welcome to Common Purpose tonight. Glad you could be here. We certainly talk about you a lot when you're not here. So I figured instead of talking about you, let's just bring you on and let you speak for yourself on tonight's broadcast.
Happy to be here. Thanks, boss, for the invitation. I'm used to, my comfort zone is Wednesdays at 1:00, but it kind of change it up, mix it up. I know the one person who's probably jealous right now is Naj, because he's so used to being to my right there. But so happy to be here. Happy to engage in the conversation.
Yeah, well, and the only difference really is that on our Monday night broadcast, it's after work for some folks, and so some of our audience members are drinking. So
Yeah.
they may ask different questions than folks would at 1:00, right? We just have to be prepared. By the way, with that in mind, folks, if you've got questions about policy issues in California at the federal level, this is a great night tonight to be here to put those into the chat so we can ask Edgar. But Edgar, I want to start with what's on so many of our minds. And I have to say this, we understand that at ACSA, we represent a diverse membership. And they are also diverse politically, and they vote accordingly. We have members, amazing members all over the state that vote for both parties. As such, we know that this has been a challenging presidential election. As I wrote in my EdCal article, I think the silver lining is we have a record number of votes being cast this year, I think, which is amazing. We have a record number of voters of color voting this year. That's amazing. Regardless of who you voted for, those data points are impressive. And we know that it hasn't been certified and there's some questions about the election, but we're just going to assume for the sake of this conversation tonight that the AP reports and the other agencies that have called the election for Joe Biden, that former Vice President Biden is President-elect Biden for the sake of this conversation. What does the implication, or what does that mean? What are the implications, rather, for California, given the outcomes so far of that election?
I think that's the important question, Wes, and I think it's one that we've been giving a lot of thought to in terms of, okay, after all the fanfare and whether all this back and forth about debates and calling states or whatnot, at the end of the day, I mean, we're going down this path that it is President-elect Biden who's going to take office. We're going to have a Vice President, Kamala Harris, which I think is obviously significant from a historical perspective. To your question, in terms of how does this impact California, we have a Californian as part of the presidential ticket, right? We haven't had that in a few decades. And I think just that in itself is going to have a tremendous trickle-down effect. I mean, for better or for worse, and then there was just the nature of the politics of the last 4 years. California found itself opposite where we were at in terms of a lot of the politics coming out of the White House. That's obviously going to have a stark change. I think we're going to see California having a lot bigger imprint, a lot more influence in terms of the policies that are coming out of Washington, D.C. For a long time, kind of the adage has been that we get shortchanged for the amount of, whether it be tax dollars or representatives that we send back to D.C. Even with right now in the House of Representatives, I mean, we have 2 Californians that are the respective leaders of their parties. With all that said, it is a game changer to now have Biden-Harris in the White House, from Secretary of Education, which we could talk about in a second, to all the way down to now what the influence of the state is going to be in trying to give support to our schools. I think having a change there in the Department of Education, I think it's going to have to be somebody, and every signal is that it is going to be somebody who's a little more attuned to what's happening in our schools. I think the one prominent piece I would say in the short term that is probably going to have the biggest impact is just all of our, not just our schools, but I think our communities in general, hungry for another stimulus bill, for another relief bill, given what's happening with the virus. Notable day here in California today with new restrictions being outlined. And I think that's going to be the biggest change with now the change in presidential administration about what level of support may our state and with that our schools are going to get with the new presidential administration.
No, I appreciate that. That's a great point, that we could anticipate more support for our defense against COVID-19 in combating the pandemic. We could expect more support from DC and California, which would be great. I want to get to the Secretary of Ed in a second, but on this message of more support, what can we expect in the way of funding? We know that President-elect Biden has already talked about funding for education. His wife's a former teacher. He's already mentioned it. We know that with the vice president-elect being from California, we should be able to expect some of those funds to really benefit our interests in California. Can you speak to that at all, relative to actual dollars and cents in the form of support?
Yeah, and this is a real important question for California, something that our school leaders know well, especially those dealing with budgets, that our state budget was built this year predicated on the notion that we would get federal support. And obviously we haven't got that yet. In the absence of that, our schools are facing tremendous deferrals. We're going to have cash flow issues that could potentially turn into reductions. So it's really, really important that the feds do come through and really are able to piggyback what we had happen earlier this year and give us that bridge until the pandemic really runs its course. I think specifically, this is where there's still some unanswered questions depending on the timing. You have Mitch McConnell, who's the leader of the Senate, has indicated that there is some eagerness, or that there's some willingness. I think eagerness is probably too strong, that there's some willingness to engage now in a conversation about specific support to states. And again, we're very interested on what level of that is going to go specifically to schools. And there is even talk of potentially doing this even in the lame duck Congress, essentially in these last couple months when Donald Trump is still going to be in office. Obviously, those dynamics are very different than what happens come January 20th when President Biden enters office. Those negotiations look very different. And they've indicated that this is a big priority to them. This is a very priority, not only to get that support to states, but what can we do to support schools specifically, with ultimately the goal of trying to get more kids back to in-person instruction, and what's the level of resources that they need to achieve that.
Yeah, that's welcome news. That's welcome news. We alluded to this. Dr. Linda Darling-Hammond, who is one of our amazing leaders in California, a friend of ACSA's. In fact, she gave us a shout out on one of her pressers at the beginning of COVID. We loved that. She's leading this transition team for the Biden-Harris team. What are we at ACSA telling her and others that our priorities are for the next Secretary of Education?
Yeah, I mean, going back to your original question, Wes, I think it's pretty notable that the chairperson of this transition team specifically dedicated to education is none other than Linda Darling-Hammond, who right now is the president of our State Board of Education and the senior advisor to the governor on all education policy issues. So going back to this whole notion of the influence California has, I think given her experience, her background, her studies, and her research, this is going to be an underlying theme in all of the decisions that are made there in terms of what are going to be the priorities for a Biden administration when it comes to K-12 education. I think we should all feel pretty good that we have Linda Darling-Hammond in that seat advising the president. In terms of what specifics, I think we're going to see a few things. One, she's going to have a heavy hand in this committee on identifying who the next Secretary of Education is going to be. And from what they've already early indications are, is that there, anytime there's a change, and especially, with the current administration, the current secretary got a lot of notoriety, not always for the best reasons. And I think they're going to be looking for a change in direction there. Namely, they want an educator. They want somebody who's either spent time in the classroom, or what's important to us, and I think we would like to see as well, obviously, in addition to having spent time in the classroom, somebody who maybe knows how to run a system, who's been an administrator. So that's one of the criteria that they're setting forth. And not surprisingly, some of the names we're hearing are, some superintendents, some of the biggest school districts in the country. We're hearing names like Randy Weingarten, who's the head of the American Federation of Teachers. I think those are the type of individuals that we'll see in the running for that type of position. I think in terms of specific policies, and I think everything is going to come down to COVID, right? I think that's going to be their first and foremost priority across the board, even as it relates to schools. And the one piece that I would not be surprised, while still giving that local control to states, is having a more systemic approach on how is it that we're going to battle the pandemic, and how it relates to schools. What do we need to do from a systemic level to get kids back into the classroom? I think that's going to be a major priority of this new administration.
I can tell you it's certainly a priority of ours, of our members, of parents and students around the state. And I just want to highlight something you said. I appreciate that the administration-elect is looking at classroom experience. They absolutely should. What I think is great about the folks that we represent is that they have classroom experience rather, and they also have administrative experience where they have overseen large systems. They've seen the system in its entirety, and I believe that's absolutely the leadership experience we need at the federal level. So we'll keep pushing on that. We mentioned federal funding. We'll finish this topic with this question from Stan Rose. He asked, is there anything that can be done individually or collectively at the local level to increase COVID relief funding to schools? And grassroots advocacy is one of our biggest initiatives. So what would you say to Stan and others?
Oh yeah, Stan asked a question. It points out an issue that we've been beating the drum on this issue. And I think what Stan did, I said some of the comments there about talking to the local representatives and telling that story. I know we sound like a broken record when we talk about telling your story, but one of the things that I would key in on there is our members have a lot to be proud of, right? And our educators have definitely stepped up in this time of COVID and dealing with the pandemic and serving the needs of students. One of the things that I think we have to not be shy about is, while still exemplifying where things are going well, talk about the challenges. Talk about what the reality has been for our students on a day-to-day basis. What has been some of the drawbacks of just distance learning or trying to manage the pandemic in terms of our staff or our teachers? I think too often in this effort to put our best foot forward, we actually are a little bit intimidated to say, like, this is exactly what we need and this is the impact that it's going to make on our students. So I think that in short, it's just telling that story and making the case on what resources will do to help them better support their students.
Yeah, right on. And by the way, Stan, thanks for that. Stan's always good about getting his questions. If any of the rest of you have questions you'd like to ask Edgar, tonight's a great night to get those in front of him. Speaking of resources, let's shift to California specifically. In our election, while interestingly enough, school GO bonds passed at a good rate, Prop 15 failed. So talk to us about that. Were you surprised, Edgar? And where do we go now?
Yeah, it's going to keep some political scientists and maybe some grad students in school. It's going to give them a lot of literature there and research to really ponder for some time. So Prop 15, again, which was the Schools and Communities First, or the split roll initiative, failed for all the year. All the talk right now in the wake of the presidential election was how the polling was wrong. Interestingly enough, Prop 15, it was right on. We polled this question in some of our efforts with CSBA earlier last year, and it was coming in at exactly 48%. We saw some of the other polling from PPIC and whatnot, and it was all right there. So I think the proponents, and I think full transparency, ACSA was also a supporter of Prop 15. Our board endorsed it, but we also knew that it may be a tough sell for the voters, and I think there were some early warning signs. I think one early warning sign was this spring when in March, which seems like an eternity ago because it was before COVID, when the school bond failed, Prop 13, if you might remember. And that was pretty noteworthy because school bonds had a pretty consistent record of success. But the fact of the matter was that we didn't get that passed. So I think there was some indication there that there was something amiss in terms of the voters about their willingness to adopt a statewide initiative. Wes, you mentioned local initiatives. I was looking at some statistics a couple of days ago. I think it was of statewide parcel taxes. I think 23 of them passed statewide. Only 13 failed. So local, wow. Those passed. When you look at also local bond measures, so local facilities bonds or whatnot, I think the number was, if I'm not mistaken, about 40 passed, and only a handful of them failed. So what does that tell us? Voters were willing to invest in their schools locally. I think there's a little bit more level of trust there in terms of what's happening in their community. When you remove that a little bit on the statewide level, I think there's a little bit more hesitancy. Not to mention with Prop 15, you were going after the historical Prop 13 in terms of property taxes, even if it was commercial. I think all that together was, even in this electorate, even with this turnout and with this electorate that was seen as more progressive than any other turnout we would have, it was still too much to overcome on that.
Yeah, and in fairness to the 15 team that was working this issue, so passionately, the downturn in the economy didn't help, right? And they couldn't have controlled for that. The good news for our members is this: we've been talking about this for 2 years now. We were working with our allies at CSBA on an initiative ourselves called the Full and Fair Funding Initiative, where Prop 15 would have brought about $3 to $5 billion to public education on an ongoing basis. Our initiative can bring $13 to $15 billion on an ongoing basis, and was polling in the low 60s when we stopped and we pulled back because our board, as did CSBA, decided we were not going to put two initiatives on the ballot and kill both immediately, that we would hold ours and see what happened. Well, now we've seen what happened. And now it's really time for our friends and allies in labor to join us, to put our Full and Fair Funding Initiative up next. And let's bring some real money and have a greater chance of being successful than we could have with 15. I want to transition a bit because another thing on people's minds, it's a policy issue, it's not an election issue. But staying in this realm of policy, the governor came on the TV today and made an announcement, which, as I've said to you before, all of us get nervous when Governor Newsom shows up on TV. If it's Dr. Galley, we're like, all right, cool, we'll get to learn something. He steps up and it's like, oh man, what are we gonna have to do now to clarify, to help our members? What are we going through? And kind of dropped a bit of a bomb today about this emergency brake with the blueprint for a safer economy. Tell us what that is, and then let's talk about what it isn't for our members in just a second. But what is it?
Yeah, I definitely feel you on the, anytime I get in my email, the governor will be speaking at noon today, whatever's going on. I know I got to clear my schedule there because we joke of what's been our job over the last 7-8 months, whatever we're on now. I mean, I think part of our job is just try to be translator to the governor, right? Governor says something at the press conference. We then try to communicate that out to our members on what is that going to mean for them and for our schools. Well, today, what was definitely not good news. I would characterize it as a little bit concerning, but I think it's a direct response of what's happening right now. And it seemed like California was a little bit protected from this, but then the rates over the last couple of weeks have been pretty alarming. COVID rates, and I think the indication that they gave, the statistic that in just the last 7 to 14 days, our rates in California have essentially doubled. And while this is we're still doing much better much better than other parts of the country. I mean, just context there in terms of the positivity rate, the number of folks that are coming back infected, in compared to the number of tests we had, is still very low. I mean, I think we're still in the I don't think we've reached 4 or 5% yet. I mean, we have some states that their positivity rate is in the 20s, 30s, right? But nonetheless, because of this alarming jump in the last couple of weeks, the governor exercised some authority that they had warned us when they put out this latest blueprint, essentially this tiered system of every county was going to be in purple, red, orange, yellow, depending on what your case rates were, depending on your positivity rate. And just to remind folks, under the old rules, if you missed metrics for 2 weeks, you would get demoted down to a more restrictive tier. Sacramento, for example, Sacramento here had got into the red. They missed their metrics in terms of case rates per 100,000 for 2 weeks. They are now back in the red. What the governor did today, and I think as of last week, we still had about 29 counties that were in that purple rate. That had been fluctuating. What the governor did today is what he said, pull the emergency handbrake from the system, as he called it. And by doing so, instead of counties missing their metrics for 2 weeks, essentially if you miss it for 1 week, you get demoted. So now as a result, given these alarming rates that we've seen over the last couple of weeks, now we're back to 41 counties back into the purple, if you will, or the most restrictive tier in our statewide system. What does all this mean? It means certain businesses, no indoor dining, a number of businesses will not be able to function. There's more limitations on a number of community services. Now, interesting for schools, and this could get really confusing. For schools, the guidelines say you cannot open up school if you're in the purple. So if you're in the purple, you have to start in distance learning, or you have to operate in distance learning, with the notable exception that if you were a county that opened up in red or in another tier, and during that time you got demoted, you can still continue to operate. And this is going to take some messaging on our end. I know we've already gotten some questions, but the fact of the matter is that despite 41 counties going back to this more restrictive tier, schools can operate if they were opened while they were in the least restrictive tier, and then their status changed, given this announcement or just their status change over the last number of weeks.
Yeah, no, that's powerful. I mean, so on the one hand, the governor said they're skipping that whole 2 weeks. Like the governor's team told me yesterday, they may look at 2 days worth of data and say it's bad enough. If we're ever going to realize our vision of some January reopening of schools, like so many have planned, we've got to be more cautious now. But does that mean we can't operate in person? And the answer, folks, is no. Even if you're in purple and you haven't opened in some other color before you went to purple, you still have the elementary waiver at your disposal. And we get it. It's not perfect. You have to work with county public health. You also have the small cohorts that you can bring onto your campus with a lot of discretion there. If you did open and now you're back in or into the purple for the first time, you don't have to close necessarily. So just because we're moving in that color direction doesn't mean you can't be in person if it's safe for you to do so according to those provisos. Edgar, we're running out of time a bit, but I wanted to get to this one question because Holly Eads sent this in. And, if one of our friends and former board members asks a question, man, we got to answer it, right? That's a rule, regardless of the time. And she says, any word on limited liability protections for school districts as part of this relief package?
Yeah, I know that's something that we've been following real closely here on the statewide level. We had an effort that stalled, but we're already making plans to re-engage on that effort come January. And I think come these conversations in terms of what's going to be new here in Washington, D.C., it remains to be seen. I do think that there's still some bipartisan support for some limited liability protection. I think that is going to be something that will be a major part of the discussions. like so many of these things, it's just going to depend on the timing, right? When the parties come together and actually pass a package. But we do think that it will be part of the discussions, especially as our members continue to make the case that this is yet another obstacle to reopening schools.
Yeah. Yeah, thanks for the question, Holly. We always appreciate you. And I'll just point out that Holly and I, you just saw her photo there on the ticker. We both met the Dalai Lama. He held her hands and put his forehead on hers. He just like waved at me. I got like a high air five. I didn't get the hands and all of that. So Holly outdid me again. Hey, I want to tell all of you that are there that have colleagues that are doing great work. If you want to come on this show and inspire others through your store, you want to come on and talk about how you've approached hybrid, how you've done something, even in distance learning, that's been a game changer for you. I think it's time we not just show videos of you doing the work. Let's get you on. Let's talk about it together. Let's share your success, your ahas, and show some videos. So message us, message me, message the team, put it in the chat. If you want to come on this broadcast and share what's working for you and inspire hope around the state. Speaking of hope, we always end this show with what brings us hope. Um, Many of you don't know this, but this is Edgar's 5-year ACSA anniversary. He's been with us now for 5 years, so round of applause for Edgar. But I'll tell you, um, every one of the GR people, when I've asked them, why do you work here? And this includes Laura, who's worked here longer than I have. They'll say to a person, it's because of what ACSA fights for and stands for, and that's the rights of students. Each one of them to a person has said that. And so their North Star and their passion towards that North Star give me great hope. And I believe that's why we are so successful, because that is their focus. That's who they are at their core. So thank you, Edgar, and your team. Edgar, what gives you hope?
Well said, Wes. I mean, I think I reflect on these 5 years, and this year in itself has felt like it was 5 years. But I think just turning the corner on some of this is what gives me hope. I know we're all looking to this new year. It's a symbolic marker, but I do see things changing. I do see, even while we're in the midst of this of the biggest spike, frankly, that we've had in the pandemic, we at least see some good news coming. There's news about vaccines. Today we were having some conversations about some real conversations about how may they distribute a vaccine. There's talk about making school employees higher on the prioritization level there when they're distributing vaccines, in order so we can get kids back into classrooms. So I think as we look into 2021, some of these pieces do give me hope that we are going to turn the corner here soon. It's going to still take a lot of work. I know I'm taking serious all of the messaging from public health about we have to think about this holiday season very different than what we typically think about it in terms of being with folks. But I see that as a sacrifice to hopefully being able to fulfill what our members. That's why it's such a privilege to work for this organization. You see the passion, the energy of just trying to serve kids. And we see how hard people are trying to do what they can, even under these circumstances. I think our members continue to give me hope. And I do see that we're hopefully going to be able to utilize these changes, whether it be at the federal level, what's coming out in terms of positive medical news, make things right, hopefully, for our kids.
That's right. Reframe the crisis as an opportunity to get better for California's 6.3 million, right? Well, Edgar, thanks for taking time. You do your own show. You're busy. Thanks for coming on at this dinner/cocktail hour and sharing some of your insights with our members. Really, really grateful for you, for your team. To all of you out there, again, you inspire all of us. Thank you for the work that you're doing. As I've said, we're not just going to get through this. We're going to prevail. We're going to prevail and be better because of what we've learned. And in the meantime, stay safe, be well. We'll see you next week. Thanks.